And we are back. Oh, man. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Just Chatting, aka Just Reading, until I can make that a thing, its own category. It is what it is. But I wanted to say, hey, Valen. Um, Hello to everybody, and I wanted to show a couple of different surprises. I added a new channel point redeem, which is snack time. And I am prepared with snacks. I have coffee, I have water, I have my snack, I have everything that anybody can request from me, hopefully. And then I also have a big surprise and a little bit of a reveal. I wanted to show I have a new avatar. And here she is. She's super cute. I had this commissioned off of Etsy, and so she has a couple of different states that are really fun. Um, yeah, I know, she's really cute. It was pointed out to me that my character bounces around too much. Yes, Chibi Vex. And this one's a lot closer to, I was able to use the reference sheet that Siege created for me and had this commissioned off of that. So it made a big difference. But I have a couple of different avatar states that I can like toggle through, which are really super cute. I have, of course, this is my neutral just sitting here talking to you. This is Happy Vex. So she's bouncing around, very happy, very excited. Um, then I have my angry face. I was able to get those ears rotated around. That was one of those little detail things that when I'm angry, this is what it should be. Um, I also have a much better sad state for Vex. Again, with the ears rotated back and the sad little face. And this is a new state. I'm pretty excited about it. So now, if I want to, I can do this. Nah. Nah. It's a little winky face, tongue out expression, which I just thought was super cute. Um, but hopefully, if I can get 10 people talking here in chat, unique chatters, today, then that'll unlock 10 more VIP spots for anybody that still needs them. I think I have most of them assigned, but I still need to assign a few more, I think. And then, yeah, I'm just really excited about all the changes. But let's see here. So I've got, let me swap over. I want to make sure that the, what's the word I'm looking for? That the positioning is correct for when I'm reading. So bear with me a second. I'll switch over to my other screen. Ta-da! Well, that's not good. There she is. Okay. I'm a little too matchy-matchy with the autumn background, but it is what it is. So we might move my chibi just a little bit. That way I'm not interfering with chat. Okay. And now the fall leaves will pass in front of my face. 10 unique chatters over the course of the stream, near as I can tell, Valen. So if we have a couple of other people that they just want to say hi, that would get me that much closer. If not, the maximum amount of people that have uniquely chatted or said anything in stream in one go is 6. So, oh, see, now we're up to 3. Fantastic. Every little bit helps, and I appreciate you guys. So we've got another few chapters of Peter Pan ahead of us. And so for those of you that are quote unquote across the pond in across the Atlantic in Europe. I know that you enjoy my reading as a way to Hi, Cranky Pigman. I noticed you followed me today. Did you find me off of Twitter? All good. um, so wow, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nice. So we'll be continuing Peter Pan today. And let me go ahead and switch over to that. Where were we? Here we go, chapter 6. So we'll be going back to chapter 6 of Peter Pan. And I've got my hydration, all my ducks in a row. My I'm still new to this stream thing, a little bit, Cranky Pigman. I've been doing it for a little over a month, about a month and a half now. I started in the beginning of October, and I wanted to see how far I could get as far as progress and through various horror stories in October. And now that we're into November, I really wanted to do like sweeter, kind of more relaxing stories. And I'm depending on how far I get in Peter Pan today, and of course Wednesday, will determine what I start on Friday. It was suggested to do Treasure Island, which I think that would be a really cute one to do during the season. I have things a little bit better planned out through December, and so I will be reading those come Christmas time. So, again, welcome everyone that's here. I appreciate you. And feel free to enjoy the channel points and the new snack time redeem. I have 2 snacks just in case. So, let's get started. J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, Chapter 6. The little house. The little house. Foolish Toodles was standing like a conqueror over Windy's body when the other boys sprang, armed, from their trees. "You are too late," he cried proudly. "I have shot the Windy. Peter will be so pleased with me." Overhead, Tinker Bell shouted, "Silly ass!" and darted into hiding. The others did not hear her. They had crowded round Windy, and as they looked, a terrible silence fell upon the wood. If Windy's heart had been beating, they would have all heard it. They would all have heard it. Slightly was the first to speak. "This is no bird," he said in a scared voice. "I think it must be a lady." "A lady?" said Toodles, and fell a-trembling. "And we have killed her," Nib said hoarsely. They all whipped off their caps. "Now I see," Curly said. "Peter was bringing her to us." He threw himself sorrowfully on the ground. "A lady to take care of us at last," said one of the twins. "And you have killed her." They were sorry for him, but sorrier for themselves. And when he took a step nearer, when he took a step nearer them, they turned from him. Toodles' face was very white, but there was a dignity about him now that had never been there before. "I did it," he said, reflecting. "When ladies used to come to me in dreams, I said, 'Pretty mother, pretty mother.' But when at last she really came, I shot her." He moved slowly away. "Don't go," they called in pity. "I must," he answered, shaking. "I am so afraid of Peter." It was at this tragic moment that they heard a sound which made the heart of every one of them rise to his mouth. They heard Peter crow. "Peter!" they cried, for it was always thus that he signaled his return. "Hide her," they whispered, and gathered hastily around Windy. But Toodles stood aloof. Again came that ringing crow, and Peter dropped in front of them. "Greetings, boys!" he cried, and mechanically they saluted, and then again was silence. He frowned. "I am back," he said hotly. "Why do you not cheer?" They opened their mouths, but the cheers would not come. He overlooked it in his haste to tell the glorious tidings. "Great news, boys," he cried. "I have brought at last a mother for you all." Still no sound, except a little thud from Toodles as he dropped on his knees. "Have you not seen her?" asked Peter, becoming troubled. "She flew this way." "Ah me," one voice said, and another said, "Oh, mournful day." Toodles rose. "Peter," he said quietly, "I will show her to you." And when the others would still have hidden her, he said, "Back, twins, let Peter see." So they all stood back and let him see. And after he had looked for a little time, he did not know what to do next. "She is dead," he said uncomfortably. "Perhaps she is frightened at being dead." He thought of hopping off in a comic sort of way till he was out of sight of her, and then never going near the spot any more. They would all have been glad to follow if he had done this. But there was the arrow. He took it from her heart and faced his band. "Whose arrow?" he demanded sternly. "Mine, Peter," said Toodles on his knees. "Oh, dastard hand," Peter said, and he raised the arrow to use it as a dagger. Toodles did not flinch. He bared his breast. "Strike, Peter," he said firmly. "Strike true." Twice did Peter raise the arrow, and twice did his hand fall. "I cannot strike," he said, with awe. There is something stays my hand." All looked at him in wonder, save Nibs, who fortunately looked at Wendy. "It is she," he cried. "The Windy lady. See her arm." Wonderful to relate, Wendy had raised her arms. Nibs bent over her and listened reverently. "I think," she said. "Poor Toodles," he whispered. "She lives," Peter said briefly. Slightly cried instantly, "The Windy lady lives!" Then Peter knelt beside her and found his button. You remember she had put it on a chain that she wore round her neck. "See," he said, "the arrow struck against this. It is the kiss I gave her. It has saved her life." "I remember kisses," Slightly interposed quickly. "Let me see it. Aye, that's a kiss." Peter did not hear him. He was begging Wendy to get better quickly, so that he could show her the mermaids. Of course, she could not answer yet, being still in a frightful faint. But from overhead came a wailing note. "Listen to Tink," said Curly. "She is crying because the Windy lives." Then they had to tell Peter of Tink's crime, and almost never had they seen him look so stern. "Listen, Tinker Bell," he cried. "I am your friend no more. Begone from me forever." She flew on to his shoulder and pleaded, but he brushed her off. Not until Wendy again raised her arm did he relent sufficiently to say, "Well, not forever, but for a whole week." Do you think Tinker Bell was grateful to Wendy for raising her arm? Oh dear no. Never wanted to pinch her so much. Fairies indeed are strange, and Peter, who understood them best, often cuffed them. But what to do with Wendy in her present delicate state of health? "Let us carry her down into the house," Curly suggested. "Aye," said Slightly, "that is what one does with ladies." "Oh no, no, no," Peter said. You must not touch her. It would not be sufficiently respectful." "That," said Slightly, "is what I was thinking. But if she lies there," Toodles said, "she will die." Something written on the page there, G153110. I wonder what that means. "Aye, she will die," Slightly admitted, "but there is no way out." "Yes, there is," cried Peter. "Let us build a little house round her." They were all delighted. "Quick," he ordered them, "bring me each of you the best of what we have. Gut out our house. Be sharp." In a moment they were as busy as sailors the night before a wedding. They scurried this way and that, down for bedding, up for firewood, and while they were at it, who should appear but John and Michael. As they dragged along the ground they fell asleep standing, stopped, woke up, moved another step, and slept again. "John! John!" Michael would cry. "Wake up! Where is Nana, John, and Mother?" And then John would rub his eyes and mutter, "It is true, we did fly." You may be sure they were very relieved to find Peter. "Hello, Peter," they said. "Hello," replied Peter amicably, though he had quite forgotten them. He was very busy at the moment measuring Windy with his feet to see how large a house she would need. Of course, he meant to leave room for chairs and a table. John and Michael watched him. "Is Windy asleep?" they asked. "Yes." "John," Michael proposed, "let us wake her and get her to make supper for us." And as he said it, some of the other boys rushed on, carrying branches for the building of the house. "Look at them!" he cried. "Curly," said Peter in his most captain-y voice, "see that these boys help in the building of the house." "Aye, aye, sir." "Build a house?" exclaimed John. "For the Windy," said Curly. "For Windy?" John said aghast. "Why? She is only a girl." "That," explained Curly, "is why we are her servants." "You? Windy's servants?" "Yes," said Peter, "and you also. Away with them." The astounded brothers were dragged away to hack and hew and carry. "Chairs and a fender first," Peter ordered. "Then we shall build the house round them." "Aye," said Slightly. "That is how a house is built. It all comes back to me." Peter thought of everything. "Slightly," he cried, "fetch a doctor." "Aye, aye," said Slightly at once, and disappeared, scratching his head. But he knew Peter must be obeyed, and he returned in a moment, wearing John's hat and looking solemn. "Please, sir," said Peter, going to him, "are you a doctor?" The difference between him and the other boys at such a time was that they knew it was make-believe, while to him make-believe and true were exactly the same thing. This sometimes troubled them, as when they had to make believe that they had had their dinners. If they broke down in their make-believe, he rapped them on the knuckles. "Yes, my little man," anxiously replied Slightly, who had chapped knuckles. "Please, sir," Peter explained, "a lady lies very ill." She was lying at their feet, but Slightly had the sense not to see her. "Tut, tut, tut," he said. "Where does she lie?" "In yonder glade." "I will put a glass thing in her mouth," said Slightly, and he made believe to do it, while Peter waited. It was an anxious moment when the glass thing was withdrawn. "How is she?" inquired Peter. "Tut, tut, tut," said Slightly. "This has cured her." "I am glad," Peter cried. "I will call again in the evening," Slightly said. "Give her beef tea out of a cup with a spout to it." But after he had returned the hat to John, he blew big breaths, which was his habit on escaping from a difficulty. In the meantime, the wood had been alive with the sound of axes. Almost everything needed for a cozy dwelling already lay at Windy's feet. "If only we knew," said one, "the kind of house she likes best." "Peter," shouted another, "she's moving in her sleep." "Her mouth opens," cried a third, looking respectfully into it. "Oh, lovely!" "Perhaps she is going to sing in her sleep," said Peter. "Windy, sing the kind of house you would like to have." Immediately, without opening her eyes, Windy began to sing. "I wish I had a pretty house, the littlest ever seen, with funny little red walls and a roof of mossy green." It's a bit of a limerick there. They gurgled with joy at this, for by the greatest good luck the branches they had brought were sticky with red sap, and all the ground was carpeted with moss. As they rattled up the little house, they broke into song themselves. "We've built the little walls and roof and made a lovely door, so tell us, Mother Windy, what are you wanting more?" To this she answered rather greedily, "Oh, really, next I think I'll have gay windows all about, with roses peeping in, you know, and babies peeping out." With a blow of their fists, they made windows, and large yellow leaves were the blinds. But roses? Roses! Cried Peter sternly. Quickly they made believe to grow the loveliest roses up the walls. Babies? To prevent Peter ordering babies, they hurried into song again. We've made the roses peeping out, the babes are at the door. We cannot make ourselves, 'cause we've been made before. That's clever. Peter, seeing this to be a good idea, at once pretended that it was his own. The house was quite beautiful, and no doubt Wendy was very cozy within, though, of course, they could no longer see her. Peter strode up and down, ordering finishing touches. Nothing escaped his eagle eye, just when it seemed absolutely finished. "There's no knocker on the door," he said. They were very ashamed, but Toodles gave the sole of his shoe, and it made an excellent knocker. There we go. Absolutely finished now, they thought. Not a bit of it. There's no chimney, Peter said. We must have a chimney. It certainly does need a chimney, said John importantly. This gave Peter an idea. Sorry, close that. Weird. It certainly does need a chimney, said John importantly. This gave Peter an idea. He snatched the hat off John's head, knocked out the bottom, and put the hat on the roof. The little house was so pleased to have such a capital chimney, that, as if you say thank you, smoke immediately began to come out of the hat. Now really and truly it was finished. Nothing remained to do but to knock. All look your best, Peter warned them. First impressions are awfully important. He was glad no one asked him what first impressions are. They were all too busy looking their best. He knocked politely, and now the wood was as still as the children, not a sound to be heard except from Tinker Bell, who was watching from a branch and openly sneering. What the boys were wondering was, would anyone answer the knock? If a lady, what would she be like? The door opened, and a lady came out. It was Wendy. They all whipped off their hats. She looked properly surprised, and this was just how they had hoped she would look. "Where am I?" she said. Of course, Slightly was the first to get his word in. "Wendy, lady," he said rapidly, "for you we built this house." "Oh, say you're pleased," cried Nibs. "Lovely, darling house," Wendy said, and they were the very words they had hoped she would say. "And we are your children," cried the twins. They all went on their knees and holding out their arms, "Oh, Windy lady," and holding out their arms, cried, "Oh, Windy lady, be our mother." "Ought I?" Windy said, all shining. "Of course, it's frightfully fascinating. But you see, I am only a little girl. I have no real experience." "That doesn't matter," said Peter, as if he were the only person present who knew all about it, though he was really the one who knew least. "What we need is just a nice motherly person." We all need a nice motherly person from time to time. That makes sense. "Oh dear," Windy said. "You see, I feel that is exactly what I am." "It is, they all cried. We saw it at once. "Very well," she said. "I will do my best. Come inside at once, you naughty children. I am sure your feet are damp. And before I put you to bed, I have just time to finish the story of Cinderella." In they went. I don't know how there was room for them, but you can squeeze very tight in the Neverland. And that was the first of the many joyous evenings they had with Wendy. By and by, she tucked them up in the greatest bed in the home under the tree. But she herself slept that night in the little house, and Peter kept watch outside with drawn sword, for the pirates could be heard carousing far away, and the wolves were on the prowl. The little house looked so cozy and safe in the darkness, with a bright light showing through its blinds, and the chimney smoking beautifully, and Peter standing on guard. After a time, he fell asleep, and said, and some unsteady fairies had to climb over him on their way home from an orgy. Oh my. Huh. Okay. Some unsteady fairies had to climb over him on their way home from an orgy. Any of the other boys obstructing the fairy path at night, they would have mischiefed, but they just tweaked Peter's nose and passed on. It's just, oh, the orgy was so unexpected. It's just completely caught me off guard. My goodness. I guess that's how the way of them. So this is the drawing that's in the book here. So you can see the wolves in the background, looking around, and Peter fast asleep against the little house, protecting the door, and the carousing fairies, um, walking about. That's cute with the little mushrooms and all the details with the leaves, and the house made of leaves, and the hat, the chimney hat smoking. It's very cute. I guess the fairy orgy was unexpected. Oh my god. These books that I never know, we're always reading new books that I myself have always wanted to read.
Drink water. Become moist.
You're on to something. I feel that. I will do that just so. Just so funny. Came back from the flip page. Orgy. Oh. Oh my. Goodness. Yep. So today's water, because I try to alternate sometimes, today's water actually has the LMNT um, watermelon salt flavor, which is really quite good. It's a little bit on the sweeter side, but it is like keto friendly and like good for electrolytes and hydration. Okay. We are between chapters, and since you're new here, Cranky Pigman, one of the things that we like to do is remind everyone to get a snack, stay hydrated, stay caffeinated if that's what you need. Um, if you are getting ready to sleep, get comfortable, relax, tuck yourself in, and listen to the story. So we are we are good on ads for about an hour and 14 minutes. So we can definitely crank through some of those for the next bit. Chapter 7. The Home Under the Ground. One of the first things Peter did next day was to measure Wendy and John and Michael for hollow trees. Hook, you remember, had sneered at the boys for thinking they needed a tree apiece. But this was ignorance, for unless your tree fitted you, it was difficult to go up and down. And no two of the boys were quite the same size. Once you fitted, you drew in your breath at the top and down you went exactly the right speed, while to ascend you drew in and let out alternately, and so wriggled up. Of course, when you have mastered the action, you are able to do these things without thinking of them, and then nothing can be more graceful. But you simply must fit. And Peter measures you for your tree as carefully as for a suit of clothes, the only difference being that the clothes are made to fit you, while you have to be made to fit the tree. That's an interesting idea. Usually it is done quite easily, as by your wearing too many garments or too few, but if you are bumpy in awkward places, or the only available tree is an odd shape, Peter does some things to you, and after that you fit. Once you fit, great care must be taken to go on fitting, and this, as Wendy was to discover, to her delight, keeps a whole family in perfect condition. Wendy and Michael fitted their trees at the first try, but John had to be altered a little. After a few days' practice, they could go up and down as gaily as buckets in a well. And how ardently they grew to love their home under the ground, especially Wendy. It consisted of one large room, as all houses do, with a floor in it, with a floor in which you could dig if you wanted to go fishing, and in this floor grew stout mushrooms of a charming color, which were used as stools. A never tree tried hard to grow in the center of the room, but every morning they sawed the trunk through, level with the floor. By tea time it was always about 2 feet high, and then they put a door on top of it, the whole thus becoming a table. As soon as they cleared away, they sawed off the trunk again, and thus there was more room to play. There was an enormous fireplace, which was in almost any part of the room where you cared to light it, and across this Windy stretched strings, made of fiber, from which she suspended her washing. The bed was tilted against the wall by day and let down at 6:30, when it filled nearly half the room, and all the boys slept in it, except Michael, lying like sardines in a tin. There was a strict rule against turning round until one gave the signal, when all turned at once. Michael should have used it also, but Wendy would have a baby, and he was the littlest. And you know what women are, and the short and the long of it is that he was hung up in a basket. It was rough and simple, and not unlike what baby bears would have made of an underground house in the same circumstances. But there was one recess in the wall, no larger than a birdcage, which was the private apartment of Tinker Bell. It could be shut off from the rest of the home by a tiny curtain, which Tink, who was most fastidious, always kept drawn when dressing or undressing. No woman, however large, could have had a more exquisite boudoir and bedchamber combined. The couch, as she always called it, was a genuine queen mob, with club legs, and she varied the bedspreads according to what fruit blossoms was in season. Her mirror was a puss in boots, of which there are now only 3, unchipped, known to the fairy dealers. The washstand was a pie crust and reversible, the chest of drawers an authentic Charming the Sixth, and the carpet and rungs and the carpet and rugs of the best, the early period of Marjorie and Robin. There was a chandelier from Tiddlywinks for the look of the thing, but of course she lit the residence herself. Tink was very contemptuous of the rest of the house, as indeed was perhaps inevitable, and her chamber, though beautiful, looked rather conceited, having the appearance of a nose permanently turned up. I suppose it was all especially entrancing to Windy, because those rampageous? I'm pretty sure that's rampageous boys. Because those rampageous boys of hers gave her so much to do. Really, there were whole weeks when, except perhaps with a stocking in the evening, she was never above ground. The cooking, I can tell you, kept her nose to the pot, and even there was nothing in it, even though there was no pot. She had to keep watching that it came boiled just the same. You never exactly knew whether there would be a real meal or just a make-believe. It all depended upon Peter's whim. He could eat, really eat, if it was part of a game, but he could not stodge just to feel stodgy, which is what most children like better than anything else. The next best thing being to talk about it. Make believe was so real to him that during a meal of it, you could see him getting rounder. Of course, it was trying, but you simply had to follow his lead. And if you could prove to him that you were getting loose for your tree, he let you stodge. Windy's favorite time for sewing and darning was after they had all gone to bed. Then, as she expressed it, she had a breathing time for herself, and she occupied it in making new things for them and putting double pieces. on- and putting double pieces on the knees, for they were all most frightfully hard on their knees. When she sat down to a basket of their stockings, every heel with a hole in it, she would fling up her arms and exclaim, "Oh dear, I am sure I sometimes think spinsters are to be envied." Her face beamed when she exclaimed this. You remember about her pet wolf? Well, it very soon discovered that she had come to the island and found her out, and they just ran into each other's arms. After that, it followed her about everywhere. As time wore on, as did she think much about the beloved parents she had left behind her? This is a difficult question, because it is quite impossible to say how time does wear on the Neverland, where it is calculated by moons and suns, and there are ever so many more of them than on the mainland. But I am afraid that Wendy did not really worry about father and mother. She was absolutely confident that they would always keep the window open for her to fly back by, and this gave her complete ease of mind. What did disturb her at times was that John remembered his parents vaguely only, as people he had on, as people as he had once knew, while Michael was quite willing to believe that she was really his mother. These things scared her a little, and nobly anxious to do her duty, she tried to fix the old life in their minds by setting them examination papers on it, as like as possible to the ones she used to do at school. The other boys thought this awfully interesting and insisted on joining, and they made slates for themselves and sat round the table, writing and thinking hard about the questions she had written on another slate and passed round. They were the most ordinary questions. What was the color of mother's eyes? Which was taller, father or mother? Was mother blonde or brunette? Answer all three questions if possible. A. Write an essay of not less than 40 words on how I spent my last holidays, or the characters of father and mother are compared. Characters. I've never seen it spelled that way, but that's definitely the word. The characters of father and mother compared. Only one of these is to be attempted. Or 1. Describe mother's laugh. 2. Describe father's laugh. 3. Describe mother's party dress. 4. Describe the kennel and its inmate. They were just everyday questions like these, and when you could not answer them, you were told to make a cross. And it was really dreadful what a number of crosses even John made. Of course, the only boy who replied to every question was Slightly, and no one could have been more hopeful of coming out first, but his answers were perfectly ridiculous, and he really came out last, a melancholy thing. Peter did not compete. For one thing, he despised all mothers except Wendy, and for another, he was the only boy on the island who could neither write nor spell, not the smallest word. He was above all that sort of thing. By the way, the questions were all written in the past tense. What was the color of mother's eyes, and so on. Wendy, you see, had been forgetting too. Adventures, of course, as we shall see, were of daily occurrence. But about this time, Peter invented, with Wendy's help, a new game that fascinated him enormously, until he suddenly had no more interest in it, which, as you've been told, what happened was what always happened with his games. It consisted in pretending not to have adventures, in doing the sort of thing that John and Michael had been doing all their lives, sitting on stools, on sitting on stools, flinging balls in the air, pushing each other, going out for walks, and coming back without having killed so much as a grizzly. To see Peter doing nothing on a stool was a great sight. He could not help looking solemn at such times. To sit still seemed to him such a comic thing to do. He boasted that he had gone a walk for the good of his health. For several sons, these were the most novel of all adventures to him, and John and Michael had to pretend to be delighted also. Otherwise, he would have treated them severely. He often went out alone, and when he came back, you were never quite absolutely certain whether he had had an adventure or not. He might have forgotten it so completely that he had nothing about it, that he said nothing about it, and then when you went out, you found the body. And on the other hand, he might say a great deal about it, yet you could not find the body. Sometimes he came home with his head bandaged, and then Windy cooed over him and bathed it in lukewarm water while he told a dazzling tale. But she was never quite sure, you know. There were, however, many adventures which she knew to be true, because she was in them herself. And there were still more that were at least partly true, for the other boys were in them and said they were wholly true. To describe them all would require a book as large as an English Latin English dictionary. And the most we can do is to give one as a specimen of an average hour on the island. The difficulty is which one to choose. Should we take the brush with the Redskins at Slightly Gulch? It was a sanguinary affair, and especially interesting as showing one of Peter's peculiarities, which was that in the middle of a fight he would suddenly change sides. At the gulch, when victory was still in the balance, sometimes leaning this way and sometimes that, he called out, "I'm Redskin today. What are you, Toodles?" And Toodles answered, "Redskin, what are you, Nubs? What are you, Nibs?" And Nibs said, "Redskin, what are you, Twin?" And so on, and they were all Redskin. And of course this would have ended the fight had not the real Redskins, fascinated by Peter's methods, agreed to be lost boys for that once. And so at it they all went again, more fiercely than ever. The extraordinary upshot of this adventure was, but we have not decided yet, that this is the adventure we are to narrate. Perhaps a better one would be the night attack by the Redskins on the house under the ground, when several of them stuck in the hollow trees and had to be pulled out like corks. Or we might tell how Peter saved Tiger Lily's life in the Mermaid's Lagoon, and so made her his ally. Or we could tell of that cake the pirates cooked so that the boys might eat it and perish, and how they placed it in one cunning spot after another, but always Windy snatched it from the hands of her children, so that in time it lost its succulence, and became as hard as a stone, and was used as a missile, and Hook fell over it in the dark. Of course, or suppose we tell of the birds that were Peter's friends, particularly of the never bird, but that built in a tree overhanging the lagoon, and how the nest fell into the water, and still the bird sat on her eggs, and Peter gave orders that she was not to be disturbed. That is a pretty story, and the end shows how grateful a bird can be. But if we tell it, we must also tell the whole adventure of the lagoon, which would of course be telling two adventures rather than just one. A shorter adventure, and quite as exciting, was Tinker Bell's attempt, with the help of some street fairies, to have the sleeping Wendy conveyed on a great floating leaf to the mainland. Fortunately, the leaf gave way, and Wendy woke, thinking it was bath time, and swam back. Or, again, we might choose Peter's defiance of the lions, when he drew a circle round him on the ground with an arrow and dared them to cross it. And though he waited for hours, with the other boys and Windy looking on breathlessly from the trees, not one of them would accept his challenge. Which of these adventures shall we choose? The best way will be to toss for it. I have tossed, and the lagoon has won. This almost makes one makes this almost makes one wish that the gulch or the cake or Tink's leaf had won. Of course, I could do it again and make it best out of three. However, perhaps fairest to stick to the lagoon. Eh. That was a fun one. So then we're going to go into the next chapter talking about the lagoon. That's cute. I really like that. I think they did a good job with that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is everyone having a good Sunday? I hope so.
Snack time!
You're not wrong.
Nom, 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 nom.
You like that? The Cookie Monster audio is really cute. I was trying to be clever. I'm always trying to be clever. Not quite as clever as Peter Pan, but we try. Time to have a snack. So today's snack is brought to you by a local fair. Um, I have a smoothie bowl from my favorite place, and it is called the Glacier Bowl. So they do a spirulina smoothie base, and it has a coconut milk chia pudding, granola, blueberries, cocoa nibs, pineapple, and a little bit of coconut mixed in. Oh, and honey. It's got honey. Can never have too much honey. It's just too good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is quite good. Oh my. That's quite good. So we are about an hour in. We're doing pretty good. We had our first whatchamacallit break. Our first ad break kind of early while I was still setting things up. Sorry it took me a little longer. I usually like to be right on the hour, but setting up the new uh, redeem and then getting my character set up um, was a bit of an undertaking. So I wanted to make sure that I had it all dialed in and everything was connected. So we do our best. Okay, couple of bites of my snack. Everyone's back. Let's get started. We are on to chapter 8, The Mermaid's Lagoon. If you shut your eyes and are a lucky one, you may see at times a shapeless pool of lovely pale colors suspended in the darkness. Then, if you squeeze your eyes tighter, the pools begin to take shape, and the colors become so vivid that with another squeeze they must go on fire. But just before they go on fire, you see the lagoon. This is the nearest you ever have to get, the nearest you ever get to it on the mainland. Just one heavenly moment, if there could be two moments, you might see on the surf and hear the mermaids singing. The children often spent long summer days on this lagoon, swimming or floating most of the time, playing the mermaid games in the water, and so forth. You must not think from this that the mermaids were on friendly terms with them. On the contrary, it was among Wendy's lasting regrets that all the time she was on the island, she never had a civil word from one of them. I'm going to stop right there and pull up that picture. So these are, so we have birds, some sparrows, various heron, I'm guessing, the mermaids, and Peter himself cavorting in the waves with a lovely rainbow. That's cute. And I'm assuming those are more mermaids on the land there. I don't see Miss Wendy or the Lost Boys, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. When she stole softly to the edge of the lagoon, she might see them by the score, especially on Marooner's Rock, where they loved to bask, combing out their hair in a lazy way that quite irritated her. Or she might even swim on tiptoe, as it were, to within a yard of them, but they saw her and dived, probably splashing her with their tails, not by accident, but intentionally. They treated all the boys in the same way, except, of course, Peter, who chatted with them on Marooner's Rock by the hour and sat on their tails when they got cheeky. He gave Windy one of their combs. The most haunting time at which to see them is at the turn of the moon, when they utter strange wailing cries, but the lagoon is dangerous for mortals then. And until the evening of which we have now to tell, Windy had never seen the lagoon by moonlight, less from fear, for of course Peter would have accompanied her, than because she had strict rules about everyone being in bed by 7. 7, Wendy. 7? Who puts their kids to bed at 7? That's so early. Like maybe her brother Michael, but all the rest of the boys are old enough to at least 9. My goodness. I guess she was tired of him and she needed a break. But no, not really. But 7 just seems so terribly early. She was often at the lagoon, however, on sunny days after rain, when the mermaids come up in extraordinary numbers to play with their bubbles. The bubbles of many colors made in rainbow water they treat as balls, hitting them gaily from one to another with their tails, and trying to keep them in the rainbow till they burst. The goals are at each end of the rainbow, and the keepers only are allowed to use their hands. Sometimes a dozen of these games will be going on in the lagoon at the same time, and it is quite a pretty sight. Yep, that's a valid response. I do think if they are going to bed at 7 and then they're up at like 5 a.m., that makes sense with the dawn, with the sky brightening. But the moment the children tried to join in, they had to play by themselves, for the mermaids immediately disappeared. Nevertheless, we have proof that they secretly watched the interlopers, and were not above taking an idea from them, for John introduced a new way of hitting the bubble, with the head instead of the hand, and the mermaids adopted it. This is the one mark that John has left on the Neverland. It must also have been rather pretty to see the children resting on a rock for half an hour after their midday meal. Windy insisted on their doing this. And it had to be a real rest, even though the meal was make believe. So they lay there in the sun, and their bodies glistened in it, while she sat beside them and looked important. It was one such day, and they were all on Marooner's Rock. The rock was not much larger than their great bed, but of course they all knew how not to take up much room, and they were all dozing, or at least lying with their eyes shut, and pinching occasionally when they thought Windy was not looking. She was very busy stitching. While she stitched, a change came to the lagoon, with little shivers ran over it, and the sun went away and shadows stole across the water, turning it cold. Windy could no longer see the thread her needle could no longer see to thread her needle, and when she looked up, the lagoon that had always hitherto been such a laughing place seemed formidable and unfriendly. Unfriendly. Yeah, it's funny. It was not, she knew, that night had come, but something as dark as night had come. No, worse than that. It had not come, but it sent that shiver through the sea to say that it was coming. What was it? There, crowded upon all the stories she had been told of Marooner's Rock, so called because evil captains put sailors on it and leave them there to drown. They drown when the tide rises. They drown when the tide rises, then it is submerged. For then it is submerged. Of course, she should have roused the children at once, not merely because of the unknown that was stalking toward them, but because it was no longer good for them to sleep on a rock grown chilly. But she was a young mother, and she did not know this. She thought you simply must stick to your rule about half an hour after the midday meal. So, though fear was upon her, and she longed to hear male voices, she would not waken them, even when she heard the sound of muffled oars. Though her heart was in her mouth, she did not waken them. She stood over them to let them have their sleep out. Was it not brave of Windy? It was well for those boys that there was one among them who could sniff danger even in his sleep. Peter sprang erect, as wide awake at once as a dog, and with one warning cry he roused the others. He stood motionless, one hand to his ear. "Pirates!" he cried, and the others came closer to him. A strange smile was playing about his face, and Windy saw it and shuddered. While that smile was on his face, no one dared address him. All they could do was to stand ready to obey. The order came sharp and incisive. Dive! There was a gleam of legs, and instantly the lagoon seemed deserted. Marooner's Rock stood alone in the forbidding waters, as if it were itself marooned. The boat drew nearer. It was the pirate dinghy with with three figures in her, Smee and Starkey, and the third a captive, no other than Tiger Lily. Her hands and ankles were tied, and she knew what was to be her fate. She was to be left on the rock to perish, an end to one of her race more terrible than death by fire or torture. For is it not written in the book of the tribe that there is no path through water to the happy hunting ground? Yet her face was impassive. She was the daughter of a chief. She must die as a chief's daughter. It is enough. They had caught her boarding the pirate ship with a knife in her mouth. Go on, Tiger Lily, get it. She went after him. That's awesome. No watch was kept on the ship, it being Hook's boast that the wind of his name guarded the ship for a mile around. Now her fate would help to guard it also. One more whale would go to the round in the wind by night. In the gloom in the gloom that they brought with them, the two pirates did not see the rock till they crashed into it. "Luff, you lubber!" cried an Irish voice. That was Smee's. "Here's the rock. Now then, what we have to do is to hoist the redskin onto it and leave her there to drown." It was the work of one brutal moment to land the beautiful girl on the rock. She was too proud to offer a vain resistance. Quite near the rock, but out of sight, two heads were bobbing up and down, Peter's and Windy's. Windy was crying, for it was the first tragedy she had seen. Peter had seen many tragedies, but he had forgotten them all. He was less sorry than Windy for Tiger Lily. It was two against one that angered him, and he meant to save her. An easy way would have been to wait until the pirates had gone. But he was never one to choose the easy way. There was almost nothing he could not do, and he now imitated the voice of Hook. "Ahoy there, you lubbers," he called. It was a marvelous imitation. "The captain," said the pirates, staring at each other in surprise. "He must be swimming out to us," Starkey said, when they had looked for him in vain. "We are putting the redskin on the rock," Smee called out. "Set her free," came the astonishing answer. "Free?" "Yes, cut her bonds and let her go." "But, captain—" "At once, d'ye hear?" cried Peter, "or I'll plunge my hook in you." "This is queer," Smee gasped. "Better do what the captain orders," said Starkey nervously. "Aye, aye," Smee said, and he cut Tiger Lily's cords. At once, like an eel, she slid between Starkey's legs into the water. Of course, Wendy was very elated over Peter's cleverness, but she knew that he would be elated also, and very likely crow and thus betray himself. So at once her hand went out to cover his mouth, but it was stayed even in the act, for "Boat ahoy!" rang over the lagoon in Hook's voice, but this time it was not Peter who had spoken. Peter may have been about to crow, but his face puckered in a whistle of surprise instead. "Boat ahoy!" again came the voice. Now Windy understood. The real Hook was also in the water. He was swimming to the boat, and as his men showed a light to guide him, he had soon reached them. In the light of the lantern, Windy saw his hook grip the boat's side. She saw his evil, swarthy face as he rose, dripping from the water, and quaking. She would have liked to swim away, but Peter would not budge. He was tingling with life and also top-heavy with conceit. "Am I not a wonder? Oh, I am a wonder," he whispered to her. And though she thought so also, she was really glad for the sake of his reputation that no one heard him except herself. He signed to her to listen. The two pirates were very curious to know what had brought their captain to them, but he sat with his head on his hook in a position of profound melancholy. "Captain, is all well?" they asked timidly, but he answered with a hollow moan. "He sighs," said Smee. "He sighs again," said Starkey. "And yet a third time he sighs," said Smee. "What's up, Captain?" Then at last he spoke passionately. "The game's up," he cried. "Those boys have found a mother." Affrighted though she was, Windy swelled with pride. "Oh, evil day!" cried Starkey. "What's a mother?" asked the ignorant Smee. Windy was so shocked that she exclaimed, "He doesn't know." And always after this, she felt that if you could have, and always after this, she felt that if you could have a pet pirate, Smee would be her one. Peter pulled her beneath the water, for Hook had started up, crying, "What was that?" "I heard nothing," said Starkey, raising the lantern over the waters, and as the pirates looked, they saw a strange sight. It was the nest I have told you of, floating on the lagoon, and the Never Bird was sitting on it. "See," said Hook in answer to Smee's question. "That is a mother. What a lesson! The nest must have fallen into the water, but would the mother desert her eggs? No." There was a break in his voice, as if for a moment he recalled innocent days when, but he brushed away this weakness with his hook. Smee, much impressed, gazed at the bird as the nest was borne past, but the more suspicious Starkey said, "If she is a mother, perhaps she's hanging about here to help Peter." Hook winced. "Aye," he said, "that is the fear that haunts me." He was roused from this dejection by Smee's eager voice. "Captain," said Smee, "could we not kidnap those boys' mother and make her our mother?" "It is a princely scheme," cried Hook, and at once it took practical shape in his great brain. "We will seize the children and carry them to the boat. The boys we will make walk the plank, and Windy shall be our mother. Again, Windy forgot herself. Never, she cried and bobbed. What was that? But they could not, but they could see nothing. They thought it must have been but a leaf in the wind. Do you agree, my bullies? Asked Hook. There is my hand on it, they both said. And there is my hook. Swear. They all swore. By this time they were on the rock, and suddenly Hook remembered Tiger Lily. Where is the redskin? He demanded abruptly. He had a playful humor at moments, and they thought this was one of those moments. That is all right, Captain, Smee answered complacently. We let her go. Let her go? Cried Hook. 'Twas your own orders, the boatswain faltered. You called over the water to us to let her go, said Starkey. Brimstone and gall, thundered Hook. What cozening is here? His face had gone black with rage, but he saw that they believed their words, and he was startled. Lads, he said, shaking a little, I gave no such order. It is passing queer, Smee said, and they all fidgeted uncomfortably. Hook raised his voice, and there was a quiver in it. Spirits that haunt this dark lagoon tonight, he cried, dost hear me? Of course Peter should have kept quiet, but of course he did not. He immediately answered in Hook's voice, Odds, bobs, and hammer and tongs, I hear you. In that supreme moment, Hook did not blanch, even at the gills, but Smee and Starkey clung to each other in terror. Who are you, stranger? Speak, Hook demanded. I am James Hook, replied the voice, captain of the Jolly Roger. You are not, Hook cried hoarsely. Brimstone and gall, the voice retorted. Say that again, and I'll cast anchor in you. Hook tried a more ingratiating manner. If you are Hook, he said almost humbly, come tell me, who am I? A codfish, replied the voice. Only a codfish. A codfish? Hook echoed blankly, and it was then, but not till then, that his proud spirit broke. He saw his men draw back from him. Have we been captained all this time by a codfish? They muttered. It is lowering to our pride. They were his dogs, snapping at him, but tragic figure though he had become, he scarcely heeded them. Against such fearful evidence, it was not their belief in him that he needed, it was his own. He felt his ego slipping from him. Don't desert me, bully, he whispered hoarsely to it. In his dark nature there was a touch of the feminine, as in all the greatest pirates, and it sometimes gave him intuitions. Suddenly he tried the guessing game. Hook, he called, have you another voice? Now Peter could never resist a game. He answered blithely in his own voice, I have. And another name? Aye, aye. Vegetable, asked Hook. No. Mineral? No. Animal? No. It's just funny. Um, yes. Man? No. The answer rang out scornfully. Boy? Yes. Ordinary boy? No. Wonderful boy. To Windy's pain, the answer that rang out this time was yes. Are you in England? No. Are you here? Yes. Hook was completely puzzled. You ask him some questions, he said to the others, wiping his damp brow. Smee reflected. I can't think of a thing, he said regretfully. Can't guess, crowed Peter. Do you give it up? Of course, in his pride, he was carrying the game too far, and the miscreants saw their chance. Yes, yes, they answered eagerly. Well then, he cried, I am Peter Pan. Pan! In a moment Hook was himself again, and Smee and Starkey were his faithful henchmen. Now we have him, Hook shouted. Into the water, Smee! Starkey, mind the boat! Take him dead or alive! He leaped as he spoke, and simultaneously came the gay voice of Peter. Are you ready, boys? Aye, aye, from various parts of the lagoon. Then lam into the pirates. The fight was short and sharp. First to draw blood was John, who gallantly climbed into the boat and held Starkey. There was a fierce struggle, in which the cutlass was torn from the pirate's grasp. He wriggled overboard, and John leapt after him. The dinghy drifted away. Here and there a head bobbed up in the water, and there was a flash of steel, followed by a cry or a whoop. In the confusion, some struck at their own side. The corkscrew of Smee got Toodles in the fourth rib, but he was himself pinked in turn by Curly. Farther from the rock, Starkey was pressing slightly, and the twins hard. Where all this time was Peter? He was seeking bigger game. The others were all brave boys, and they must not be blamed for backing from the pirate captain. His iron claw made a circle of dead water round him, from which they fled like affrighted fishes. But there was one who did not fear him. There was one prepared to enter that circle. Strangely, it was not in the water that they met. Hook rose to the rock to breathe, and at the same moment Peter scaled it on the opposite side. The rock was slippery as a ball, and they had to crawl rather than climb. Neither knew that the other was coming. Each feeling for a grip met the other's arm. In surprise, they raised their heads. Their faces were almost touching, so they met. Some of the greatest heroes have confessed that just before they fell okay. Some of the greatest heroes have confessed that just before they fell to, they had a sinking. Fell to, they had a sinking. That is a weird sentence. Some of the greatest heroes have confessed that just before they fell to, they had a sinking. Weird sentence. Had it been so with Peter at the moment, I would admit it. After all, this was the only man that Seacook had feared. But Peter had no sinking. He had one feeling only, gladness. And he gnashed his pretty teeth with joy. Quick as thought, he snatched a knife from Hook's belt and was about to drive it home, when he saw that he was higher up the rock than his foe. It would not have been fighting fair. He gave the pirate a hand to help him up. It was then that Hook bit him. Not the pain of this, but its unfairness was what dazed Peter. It made him quite helpless. He could only stare, horrified. Every child is affected thus the first time he is treated unfairly. All he thinks he has a right to when he comes to you to be yours is fairness. After you have been unfair to him, he will love you again, but he will never afterwards be quite the same boy. No one ever gets over the first unfairness. No one except Peter. He often met it, but he always forgot it. I suppose that was the real reason between him and all the rest, the real difference between him and all the rest. So when he met it now, it was like the first time, and he could just stare, helpless. Twice the iron hand clawed him. A few minutes afterwards, the boys saw Hook in the water, striking wildly for the ship. No elation on his pestilent face now. Only white fear, for the crocodile was in dogged pursuit of him. On ordinary occasions the boys would have swum alongside, cheering, but now they were uneasy, for they had lost both Peter and Windy and were scouring the lagoon for them, calling them by name. They found the dinghy and went home in it, shouting "Peter! Windy!" as they went, but no answer came save mocking laughter from the mermaids. They must be swimming back or flying, the boys concluded. They were not very anxious. They had such faith in Peter. They chuckled boylike because they would be late for bed, and it was all Mother Windy's fault. When their voices died away, there came cold silence over the lagoon, and then a feeble cry. "Help! Help!" Two small figures were beating against the rock. The girl had fainted and lay on the boy's arm. With a last effort, Peter pulled her up the rock and then lay down beside her. Even as he also fainted, he saw that the water was rising. He knew that they would soon be drowned, but he could do no more. As they lay side by side, a mermaid caught Windy by the feet and began pulling her softly into the water. Peter, feeling her slip from him, woke with a start and was just in time to draw her back. But he had to tell her the truth. "We are on the rock, Windy," he said, "but it is growing smaller. Soon the water will be over it." She did not understand even now. "We must go," she said almost brightly. "Yes," he answered faintly. "Shall we swim or fly, Peter?" He had to tell her. "Do you think you could swim or fly as far as the island, Windy, without my help?" She had to admit that she was too tired. He moaned. "What is it?" she asked, anxious about him at once. "I can't help you, Windy. Hook wounded me, and I can neither fly nor swim." "Do you mean we shall both be drowned?" "Look how the water is rising." They put their hands over their eyes to shut out the sight. They thought they would soon be no more. As they sat thus, something brushed against Peter as light as a kiss, and stayed there as if saying timidly, "Can I be of any use?" It was the tail of a kite, which Michael had made some days before. It had torn itself out of his hands and floated away. "Michael's kite," Peter said without interest, but next moment he had seized the tail and was pulling the kite toward him. "It lifted Michael off the ground," he cried. "Why should it not carry you?" "Both of us." "It can't lift two. Michael and Curly tried." "Let us draw lots," Windy said bravely. "And you a lady?" "Never." "Already?" He had tied the tail round her. She clung to him. She refused to go without him. But with a "Goodbye, Windy," he pushed her from the rock, and in a few minutes she was borne out of his sight. Peter was alone on the lagoon. The rock was very small now. Soon it would be submerged. Pale rays of light tiptoed across the waters, and by there was to be heard at once a sound at once the most musical and the most melancholy in the world, the mermaids calling to the moon. Peter was not quite like the other Peter was not quite like other boys, but he was afraid at last. A tremor ran through him, like a shudder passing over the sea. But on the sea, one shudder follows another till But on the sea, one shudder follows another till there are hundreds of them, and Peter felt just the one. Next moment he was standing erect on the rock again, with that smile on his face and a drum beating within him. It was saying, "To die will be an awfully big adventure." I want to take another look at that shot of Peter on the rock here in the lagoon with his little leaf outfit. I'm not entirely sure. Is that like Smee's hat? To die will be an awfully big adventure. Rather prosaic of him, I think. Okay, we are on to chapter 9, and I'm in between chapters right now. And since I don't think I could finish another chapter um, in the 20 some odd minutes I have between now and an ad break, I will take a short rest right now and run that ad so that way it won't bother us in the next chapter. So I will be right back. And we are back. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Um, I had more snack and I had more juice, so we're good. Don't you worry. Thank you for thinking of me. All right, let's read chapter 9 The Never Bird. The last sounds Peter heard before he was quite alone were the mermaids retiring one by one to their bedchambers under the sea. He was too far away to hear their doors shut, but every door in the coral caves where they live rings a tiny bell when it opens or closes, as in all the nicest houses on the mainland. And he heard the bells. Steadily the waters rose till they were nibbling at his feet, and to pass the time until they made their final gulp, he watched the only thing moving on the lagoon. He thought it was a piece of floating paper, perhaps part of the kite, and wondered idly how long it would take to drift ashore. Presently, he noticed as an odd thing that it was undoubtedly out upon the lagoon definite, with some definite purpose, for it was fighting the tide and sometimes winning, and when it won, Peter, always sympathetic to the weaker side, could not help clapping. It was such a gallant piece of paper. It was not really a piece of paper. It was the Never Bird, making desperate efforts to reach Peter on her nest. By working her wings in a way she had learned since the nest fell into the water, she was able to some extent, to guide her strange craft. But by the time Peter recognized her, she was very exhausted. She had come to save him, to give him her nest, though there were eggs in it. I rather wonder at at the bird, for though he had been nice to her, he had also sometimes tormented her. I can suppose only that, like Mrs. Darling and the rest of them, she was melted because he had all his first teeth. She called out to him what what she had come for, and he called out to her what was she doing there. But of course neither of them understood the other's language. In fanciful stories, in fanciful stories, people, if it'll actually, boop, people are okay. I love it. We're trying it again. In fanciful stories, people can talk to the birds freely, and I wish for the moment I could pretend that this was such a story, and say that Peter replied intelligently to the Never Bird. But truth is best, and I want to tell only what really happened. Well, not only could they not understand each other, but they forgot their manners. They forgot their manners. Oh, that's funny. I want you to get into the nest, the bird called, and speaking as slowly and distinctly as possible, and then you can drift ashore. But I am too tired to bring it any nearer, so you must try to swim to it. What are you quacking about? Peter answered. Why don't you let the nest drift as usual? I want you, the bird said, and repeated it all over. Then Peter tried slow and distinct, What are you quacking about? And so on. The Never Bird became irritated. They have very short tempers. You dunder-headed little jay, she screamed. Why don't you do as I tell you? Peter felt. Actually, make that angry. You You dunderheaded little jay, she screamed. Why don't you do as I tell you? Peter felt that she was calling him names, and at a venture he retorted hotly, So are you! Then rather curiously they both snapped out the same remark. Shut up! Shut up! Nevertheless, the bird was determined to save him if she could, and by one last mighty effort she propelled the nest against the rock. Then she flew, deserting her eggs so as to make her meaning clear. Then at last he understood, and clutching the nest, waved his thanks to the bird as she fluttered overhead. It was not to receive his thanks, however, that she hung there in the sky. It was not even to watch him get into the nest. It was to see what he did with her eggs. There were two large white eggs, and Peter lifted them up and reflected. The bird covered her face with her wings so as not to see the last of them, but she could not help peeping between the feathers. I forget whether I have told you that there was a stave on the rock driven into it by some buccaneers of long ago to mark the site of buried treasure. The children had discovered the glittering hoard, and when in mischievous mood, used to fling showers of moidores. Oh, those are those Portuguese coins again. Moidores, diamonds, pearls, and pieces of 8 to the gulls, who pounced upon them for food, and then flew away, raging at the scurvy trick that had been played upon them. The stave was still there, and on it Starkey had hung his hat. Oh, it was Starkey's hat in the picture. Let me look at that again. So that's Starkey's hat on the stave. Okay, now we know. The stave was there, and on it Starkey had hung his hat, a deep tarpaulin, watertight with a broad brim. Peter put the eggs into the hat and set it on the lagoon. It floated beautifully. The Never Bird saw at once what he was up to, and screamed her admiration for him, and alas, Peter crowed his agreement with her. Then he got into the nest, reared the stave in, uh, reared the stave in it as a mast, and hung up his shirt for a sail. At the same moment, the bird fluttered down upon the hat, and once more sat snugly on her eggs. She drifted in one direction, and he was borne off in another, both cheering. Of course, when Peter landed, he beached his bark in a place where the bird would easily find it. But the hat was such a great success that she abandoned the nest. It drifted about till it went to pieces, and often Starkey came to the shore of the lagoon, and with many bitter feelings watched the bird sitting on his hat. As we shall not see her again, it may be worth mentioning here that all never birds now build in that shape of nest, with a broad brim over which the youngsters take an airing. Great were the rejoicings. Great were the rejoicings when Peter reached the home under the ground almost as soon as Windy, who had been carried hither and thither by the kite. Every boy had adventures to tell, but perhaps the biggest adventure of all was that they were several hours late for bed. This so inflated them that they did various dodgy things to get staying up till still longer, such as demanding bandages. But Windy, though glorying in having them all home again, safe and sound, was scandalized by the lateness of the hour and cried, "To bed! To bed!" in a voice that had to be obeyed. Next day, however, she was awfully tender and gave out bandages to everyone, and they played till bedtime at limping about and carrying their arms in slings. That was much shorter. It was so delightful. So the Never Bird is like, this is a really good design for a nest. And we're going to put a little brim on it. And from here on ever, there will always be a large, wide brim for the eggs to tuck away in and the young to stand on when they have hatched. That is really cute. He did lose his hat, though. I guess that's kind of sad. We all become very attached to our hats, I imagine. Over time, though, I'm not in the habit of leaving them just sitting on a post somewhere, personally. We are between chapters, so once again, I just want to make sure that everyone is staying hydrated, eating your snacks, or resting your eyes while I continue the story. I myself am going to continue to enjoy this delicious smoothie bowl. There we go. Now let us continue. One important result of the brush on the lagoon was that it made the Redskins their friends. Peter had saved Tiger Lily from a dreadful fate, and now there was nothing she and her braves would not do for him. All night they sat above, keeping watch over the home under the ground and awaiting the big attack by the pirates, which obviously could not be much longer delayed. Even by day they hung about, smoking the pipe of peace, and looking almost as if they wanted titbits to eat. Titbits. And looking almost as if they wanted titbits to eat. I don't think I've always seen it TID, not TIT. Interesting. They called Peter the Great White Father. Wow. That just came out of my mouth. Okay. They called Peter the Great White Father, prostrating themselves before him, and he liked this tremendously, so that it was not really good for him. The Great White Father, he would say to them in a very lordly manner, as they groveled at his feet, is glad to see the Pickaninny warriors protecting his wigwam from the pirates. It was another time. Lord Vex, it was another time. Okay. Me, Tiger Lily, that lovely creature would reply. Peter Pan saved me. Me, his velly nice friend. Me no let pirates hurt him. She was far too pretty to cringe in this way, but Peter thought it his due, and he would answer condescendingly, "It is good. Peter Pan has spoken." Always when he said Peter Pan had spoken, it meant that they must now shut up, and they accepted it humbly in that spirit. But they were by no means so respectful to the other boys, whom they looked upon as just ordinary braves. They said "how do" to them and things like that, and what annoyed the boys was that Peter seemed to think this all right. Secretly, Wendy sympathized with them a little, but she was far too loyal a housewife to listen to any complaints against father. Father knows best, she always said, whatever her private opinion must be. Her private opinion was that the Redskins should not call her a squaw. I don't think they would, Wendy. I don't think they would have. We have now reached the evening that was to be known among them as the Night of Nights. Because of its adventures and their upshot, the day, as if quietly gathering its forces, had been almost uneventful. And now the Redskins and their blankets were at their posts above, while below the children were having their evening meal, all except Peter, who had gone out to get the time. The way you got the time on the island was to find the crocodile, and then stay near him till the clock struck. This meal happened to be a make-believe tea, and they sat round the board guzzling in their greed. And really, what with their chatter and recriminations, the noise, as Wendy said, was positively deafening. To be sure, she did not mind noise, but she simply would not have them grabbing things, and then excusing themselves by saying that Toodles had pushed their elbow. There was a fixed rule that they must never hit back at meals, but should refer the matter of dispute to Wendy by raising the right arm politely and saying, "I complain of so-and-so." But what usually happened was that they forgot to do this or did it too much. "Silence!" cried Wendy, when for the 20th time she had told them that they were not all to speak at once. "Is your mug empty, Slightly, darling?" "Not quite empty, Mummy," Slightly said, after looking into an imaginary mug. "He hasn't even begun to drink his milk," Nibs interposed. This was telling, and Slightly seized his chance. "I complain of Nibs," he cried promptly. John, however, had held up his hand first. "Well, John, may I sit in Peter's chair as he is not here?" "Sit in father's chair, John." Wendy was scandalized. "Certainly not." "He is not really our father," John answered. "He didn't even know how a father does till I showed him." This was grumbling. We complain of John," cried the twins. Toodles held up his hand. He was so much the humblest of them. Indeed, he was the only humble one, that Wendy was specially gentle with him. "I don't suppose," Toodles said diffidently, "that I could be father." "No, Toodles." Once Toodles began, which was not very often, he had a silly way of going on. "As I can't be father," he said heavily, "I don't suppose, Michael, you would let me be baby?" "No, I won't," Michael rapped out. He was already in his basket. "As I can't be baby," Toodles said, getting heavier and heavier, "do you think I could be a twin?" "No, indeed," replied the twins. It's awfully difficult to be a twin." "As I can't be anything important," said Toodles, "would any of you like to see me do a trick?" "No," they all replied. Then at last he stopped. "I hadn't really any hope," he said. The hateful telling broke out again. Slightly is coughing on the table. The twins began with cheesecakes. Curly is taking both butter and honey. Nibs is speaking with his mouth full. I complain of the twins. I complain of Curly. I complain of Nibs. oh dear, cried Windy. I'm sure I sometimes think the spinsters are to be envied. She told them to clear away, and sat down to her work basket, a heavy load of stockings, and every knee with a hole in it as usual. Windy, remonstrated Michael, I'm too big for a cradle. I must have somebody in a cradle, she said, almost tartly. And you are the littlest. A cradle is such a nice homey thing to have about a house. While she sewed, they played around her, such a group of happy faces and dancing limbs lit up by the romantic fire. It had become a very familiar scene, this in the home under the ground. But we are looking on it for the first time. There was a step above, and Windy, you may be sure, was the first to recognize it. Children, I hear your father's step. He likes you to meet him at the door. Above, the redskins crouched before Peter. Watch well, braves, I have spoken. And then, and as so often before, the gay children dragged him from his tree. And so often before, but never again. He had brought nuts for the boys as well as the correct time for Windy. Peter, you just spoil them, you know, Windy simpered. Ah, old lady, said Peter, hanging up his gun. It was me told him mothers are called old lady, Michael whispered to Curly. I complain of Michael, said Curly instantly. The first twin came to Peter. Father, we want to dance. Dance away, my little man, said Peter, who was in high good humor. But we want you to dance. Peter was really the best dancer among them, but he pretended to be scandalized. Me? My old bones would rattle. And Mummy, too. What? Cried Windy, the mother of such an artful dance. But on a Saturday night, slightly insinuated. It was not really Saturday night, at least it may have been, for they had long lost count of the days. But always they wanted to do anything special, but but always if they wanted to do anything special, they said that this was Saturday night, and then they did it. Of course it is Saturday night, Peter, Windy said, relenting. People of our figure, Windy, but it is only among our own progeny. True, true. So they were told they could dance, but they must put on their nighties first. Ah, old lady, Peter said, aside to Windy, warming himself by the fire and looking down at her as she sat turning a heel. There is nothing more pleasant of an evening for you and me when the day's toil is over than to rest by the fire with the little ones nearby. It is sweet, Peter, isn't it? Windy said, frightfully gratified. Peter, I think Curly has your nose. Michael takes after you. She went to him and put her hand on his shoulder. Dear Peter, she said, with such a large family, of course, I have now passed my best. But you don't want to change me, do you? No, Windy. Certainly he did not want to change, but he looked at her uncomfortably, blinking, you know, like one not sure whether he was awake or asleep. Peter, what is it? I was just thinking, he said, a little scared. It is only make-believe, isn't it, that I am their father? Oh, yes, Wendy said primly. You see, he continued apologetically, it would make me seem so old to be their real father. But they are ours, Peter, yours and mine. But not really, Windy. Not if you don't wish it, she replied, and she distinctly heard his sigh of relief. Peter, she asked, trying to speak firmly, what are your exact feelings to me? Those of a devoted son, Windy. I thought so, she said, and went and sat by herself at the extreme end of the room. You are so queer, he said, frankly puzzled, and Tiger Lily is just the same. There's something she wants to be to me, but she says it is not my mother. No, indeed it is not, Wendy replied with frightful emphasis. Now we know why she was prejudiced against the Redskins. Wendy, Lord. No, indeed it is not, Windy replied with frightful emphasis. Now we know why she was prejudiced against the Redskins. What is it? It's not for a lady to tell. Oh, very well, Peter said, a little nettled. Perhaps Tinker Bell will tell me. Oh, yes, Tinker Bell will tell you, Wendy retorted scornfully. She is an abandoned little creature. Here Tink, who was in her bedroom eavesdropping, squeaked out something impudent. She says she glories in being abandoned, Peter interpreted. He had a sudden idea. Perhaps Tink wants to be my mother. You silly ass, cried Tinker Bell in a passion. She had said it so often that Wendy needed no translation. I almost agree with her, Wendy snapped. Fancy Wendy snapping. But she had been much tried, and she little knew what was to happen before the night was out. If she had known, she would not have snapped. None of them knew. Perhaps it was best not to know. Their ignorance gave them one more glad hour, and as it was to be their last hour on the island, let us rejoice that there were 60 glad minutes in it. They sang and danced in their nightgowns. Such a deliciously creepy song it was, in which they pretended to be frightened at their own shadows. Little witting that so soon shadows would close in upon them, from whom they would shrink in real fear. So uproariously gay was the dance, and how they buffeted each other on the bed and out of it. It was a pillow fight rather than a dance, and when it was finished the pillows insisted on one bout more, like partners who know that they may never meet again. The stories they told even before it was time for Wendy's goodnight story. Even Slightly tried to tell a story that night, and the beginning was so fearfully dull that it appalled not only the others but himself, and he said happily, "Yes, it is a dull beginning, I say. Let us pretend that it is the end." And then at last they all got up. They all got into bed for Wendy's story, the story they loved best, the story Peter hated. Usually, when she began to tell this story, he left the room or put his hands over his ears, and possibly, if he had done either of those things, this time they might all still be on the island. But tonight he remained on his stool, and we shall see what happened. Dun dun dun. I kind of want to take a look at this picture here. Okay, here they are getting ready, and Peter's just bored out of his mind, and Michael in his basket, and the boys all lined up in bed. And above them was all of the natives listening through their little tree trunk holes. That's fun. All right, we are between chapters, so you know what you gotta do. Hydrate, snack, caffeinate if you need to, or rest your eyes. So let me take a few nibbles of my dessert. Well, my snack, I should say, not dessert. I don't know, a smoothie bowl is kind of a both, I guess. Yes, there we go. Okay. Now we're back to it. This is chapter 11, Wendy's story. Wait, would that be chapter 11? I think so. I don't know. With the Roman numerals, I can never quite tell. Chapter 10. Yep, that would be when chapter 11. Okay. All right. Didn't it just looked weird for some reason. Chapter 11. Wendy's story. Listen then, said Wendy, settling down to her story, with Michael at her feet and 7 boys in the bed. There was once a gentleman. I'd rather he had been a lady, Curly said. I wish he had been a white rat, said Nibs. Quiet, their mother admonished them. There was a lady, also. And, oh, mummy, cried the first twin, you mean that there is a lady also, don't you? She is not dead, is she? Oh, no. I am awfully glad she isn't dead, said Toodles. Are you glad, John? Of course I am. Are you glad, Nibs? Yeah, yes. Are you glad, Nibs? I would be even more glad if it would actually work. All right, wonderful. There we go. Rather. Are you glad, Nibs? Rather. Are you glad, twins? We are just glad. Oh dear, said Wendy. Little less noise there, Peter called out, determined that she should have fair play, however beastly a story it might be in his opinion. The gentleman's name, Wendy continued, was Mr. Darling, and her name was Mrs. Darling. I knew them, John said to annoy the others. I think I knew them, said Michael rather doubtfully. They were married, you know, explained Wendy, and what do you think they had? White rats, cried Nibs, inspired. No. It's awfully puzzling, said Toodles, who knew the story by heart. Quiet, Toodles. They had 3 descendants. What is descendants? Well, you are one, twin. Do you hear that, John? I am a descendant. Descendants are only children, said John. Oh dear, Wendy sighed Wendy. Now these 3 children had a faithful nurse called Nana, but Mr. Darling was angry with her and chained her up in the yard, and so all the children flew away. It's an awfully good story, said Nibs. They flew away, Wendy continued, to the Neverland, where the lost children are. I just thought they did, Curly broke in excitedly. I don't know how it is, but I just thought they did. Oh, Wendy, cried Toodles. Was one of the lost children called Toodles? Yes, he was. I'm in a story! Hurrah! I am in a story, Nibs. Hush. Now I want you to consider the feelings of the unhappy parents with all their children flown away. Ooh, they all moaned, though they were not really considering the feelings of the unhappy parents one jot. Think of the empty beds. Ooh, it's awfully sad, the first twin said cheerfully. I don't see how it can have a happy ending, said the second twin. Do you, Nibs? I'm frightfully anxious. If you knew how great is a mother's love, Wendy told them triumphantly, you would have no fear. She had now come to the part that Peter hated. I do like a mother's love, said Toodles, hitting Nibs with a pillow. Do you like a mother's love, Nibs? I do just, said Nibs, hitting back. You see, Wendy said complacently. Our heroine knew that the mother would always leave the window open for her children to fly back by. So they stayed away for years and had a lovely time. Did they ever go back? Let us now, said Wendy, bracing herself up for her finest effort, take a peep into the future. And they all gave themselves the twist that makes peeps into the future easier. Years have rolled by, and who is this elegant lady of uncertain age alighting at London Station? Oh, Wendy, who is she? Cried Nibs, every bit as excited as if he didn't know. Can it be? Yes. No, it is the fair Wendy. Oh. And who are the two noble portly figures accompanying her, now grown to man's estate? Can they be John and Michael? They are. Oh! See, dear brothers, says Wendy, pointing upwards, there is the window still standing open. Ah, now we are rewarded for our sublime faith in a mother's love. So up they flew to their mummy and daddy, and pen cannot describe the happy scene over which we draw veil. That was the story, and they were as pleased with it as the fair narrator herself. Everything just as it should be, you see. Off we skip like the most heartless things in the world, which is what children are. The most heartless things in the world. Ay ya, that's harsh, but so attractive. And we have an entirely selfish time, and then when we have need of special attention, we nobly return for it, confident that we shall be rewarded instead of smacked. So great indeed was their faith in a mother's love that they felt they could afford to be callous for a bit longer. But there was one there who knew better, and when Windy finished, he uttered a hollow groan. What is it, Peter? She cried, running to him, thinking he was ill. She felt him solicitously, what a word. She felt him solicitously lower down than his chest. Where is it, Peter? It isn't that kind of pain, Peter replied darkly. Then what kind is it? Windy, you are wrong about mothers. They all gathered round him in a fright. So alarming was his agitation, and with a fine candor he told them what he had hitherto concealed. Long ago, he said, that I thought, like you, that my mother would always keep the window open for me, so I stayed away for moons and moons and moons, and then flew back. But the window was barred, for mother had forgotten all about me. And there was another little boy sleeping in my bed. I'm not sure that this was true, but Peter thought it was true, and it scared them. Are you sure mothers are like that? Yes. So this was the truth about mothers. The toads. Still, it is best to be careful, and no one knows so quickly as a child when he should give in. Windy, let us go home, cried John and Michael together. Yes, she said, clutching them. Not tonight, asked the lost boys, bewildered. They knew in what they called their hearts that one can get on quite well without a mother. That it is only the mothers who think you can't. At once, Windy replied resolutely, for the horrible thought had come to her. Perhaps mother is in half mourning by this time. This dread made her forgetful of what must be Peter's feelings. And she said to him rather sharply, Peter, will you make the necessary arrangements? If you wish, he replied as coolly as if she had asked him to pass the nuts. Not so much as a sorry to lose you between them. If she did not mind the parting, he was going to show her, was Peter, that neither did he. But of course he cared very much. And he was so full of wrath against grown-ups, who, as usual, were spoiling everything, that as soon as he got inside his tree, he breathed intentionally quick, short breaths at the rate of about 5 to a second. He did this because there is a saying in the Neverland that every time you breathe, a grown-up dies, and Peter was killing them off vindictively as fast as possible. Wow, dick move, Peter. It would be worse than before she came, they cried. We shan't let her go. Let's keep her prisoner. I skipped a whole paragraph there. Then, having given the necessary instructions to the Redskins, he returned to the home where an unworthy scene had been enacted in his absence. Panic stricken at the thought of losing Wendy, the Lost Boys had advanced upon her threateningly. "It will be worse than before she came," they cried. "We shan't let her go. Let's keep her prisoner. Aye, chain her up." In her extremity, and in her extremity, an instinct told her to which of them to turn. "Toodles," she cried, "I appeal to you." Was it not strange she appealed to Toodles? Quite the silliest one. Grandly, however, did Toodles respond. For at that moment he dropped his silliness and spoke with dignity. "I am just Toodles," he said, "and nobody minds me. But the first who does not behave to Windy like an English gentleman, I will blood him severely." He drew his hanger, and for that instant his sun was at noon. The others held back uneasily. Then Peter returned, and they saw at once that they would get no support from him. He would keep no girl in the Neverland against her will. "Windy," he said, striding up and down, "I have asked the Redskins to guide you through the wood as flying tires you so." "Thank you, Peter." Then he continued in the short, sharp voice of one accustomed to be obeyed. "Tinker Bell will take you across the sea. Wake her, Nibs." Nibs had to knock twice before he got an answer, though Tink had really been sitting up in bed listening for some time. "Who are you? How dare you? Go away," she cried. "You are to get up, Tink," Nibs called, "and take Windy on a journey." Of course, Tink had been delighted to hear that Windy was going, but she was jolly well determined not to be her courier, and she said so in still more offensive language. Then she pretended to be asleep again. "She says she won't," Nibs exclaimed, aghast at such insubordination, whereupon Peter went sternly toward the young lady's chamber. "Tink," he rapped out, "if you don't get up and dress at once, I will open the curtains, and then we shall all see you in your negligee." This made her leap to the floor. "Who said I wasn't getting up?" she cried. In the meantime, the boys were gazing very forlornly at Windy. Now equipped with John and Michael for the journey, by this time they were dejected, not merely because they were about to lose her, but also because they felt she was going off to something nice to which she had not been invited, in which they had not been invited. Novelty was beckoning to them as usual. Crediting them with a nobler feeling, Windy melted. "Dear ones," she said, "if you will all come with me, I feel almost sure I can get my father and mother to adopt you." The invitation was meant specially for Peter, but each of the boys was thinking exclusively of himself, and at once they jumped with joy. "But won't they think us rather a handful?" Nibs asked in the middle of his jump. "Oh, no," said Windy, rapidly thinking it out. "It will only mean having a few beds in the drawing room. They can be hidden behind screens on first Thursdays." "Peter, can we go?" they all cried imploringly. They took it for granted that if they went in, he would go also, but really they scarcely cared. Thus children are ever ready, when novelty knocks, to desert their dearest ones. "All right," Peter replied with a bitter smile. And immediately they rushed to get their things. "And now, Peter," Windy said, thinking she had put everything right, "I am going to give you your medicine before you go." She loved to give them medicine, and undoubtedly gave them too much. Of course, it was only water, but it was out of a bottle, and she always shook the bottle and counted the drops, which gave it a certain medicinal quality. On this occasion, however, she did not give Peter his draught, for just as she had prepared it, she saw a look on his face that made her heart sink. Get your things, Peter, she cried, shaking. No, he answered, pretending indifference. I am not going with you, Windy. Yes, Peter. No. To show that her departure would leave him unmoved, he skipped up and down the room, playing gaily on his heartless pipes. She had to run about after him, though it was rather undignified. To find your mother, she coaxed. Now, if Peter had ever quite had a mother, he no longer missed her. He could do very well without one. He had thought them out, and remembered only their bad points. No, no, he told Wendy decisively. Perhaps perhaps she would say I was old, and I just want always to be a little boy and to have fun. But Peter, no. And so the others had to be told. Peter isn't coming? Peter's not coming. Peter not coming. They gazed blankly at him, their sticks over their backs, and on each stick a bundle. Their first thought was that if Peter was not going, he had probably changed his mind about letting them go. But he was far too proud for that. If you find your mothers, he said darkly, I hope you will like them. The awful cynicism of this made an uncomfortable impression, and most of them began to look rather doubtful. After all, their faces said, were they not noodles to want to go? Now then, cried Peter, no fuss, no blubbering, goodbye, Windy. And he held out his hand cheerily, quite as if they must really go now, for he had something important to do. She had to take his hand, as there was no indication that he would prefer a thimble. You will remember about changing your flannels, Peter, she said, lingering over him. She was always so particular about their flannels. Yes. And you will take your medicine? Yes. That seemed to be everything, and an awkward pause followed. Peter, however, was not the kind that breaks down before people. Are you ready, Tinker Bell? He called out. Aye, aye. Then lead the way. Tink darted up the nardist. Tink darted up the nearest tree, but no one followed her. For it was at this moment that the pirates made their dreadful attack upon the redskins. Above, where all had been so still, the air was rent with shrieks and the clash of steel. Below there was dead silence, mouths open and remained open. Windy fell on her knees, but her arms were extended toward Peter. All arms were extended to him, as if suddenly blown in his direction. They were beseeching him, mutely, not to desert them. As for Peter, he seized his sword, the same he thought he had slain Barbecue with, and the lust of battle was in his eye. Dun dun dun. He's like, I'm ready to go kick some ass and take some names. Let's go. Oh, man. This is fun. Ah, my goodness. Like, Wendy had them all convinced. We're all gonna go back to my place, back to my parents' house, and they're gonna adopt all of you, and we're all gonna live together. And yes, there's gonna be some beds in the foyer, but that's okay. We'll hide them with screens on first Thursdays. What happens on these Thursdays? I don't know. Science. I don't really know. It's funny. It's very funny. Mm-hmm. All right, we are between chapters, so before we begin chapter 12, it's a friendly reminder to stay hydrated, grab a snack, rest your eyes, and relax and enjoy the story. I think our next chapter, this chapter 12, will probably be our last chapter for the day, as it's almost 5:30 for me, 9:30 for the East Coast. Um, And so I will probably go get myself something to eat properly for dinner. So let's see here. If everybody's ready, also any new listeners that are popping in for the first time, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the story. I at times have been both shocked and delighted by this book, and it has been quite cute at times and slightly off-putting at others. Like the story about, the Neverbird and the wide brim hat as their nest and the shape for all future nests. I think that's pretty cool. That's a good story. The the great white whatever it was that the Redskins are calling Peter, less so much. It just feels uncouth and a little bit of it's clearly dated, which makes sense given the time. All right. Let's start another one here. We are on chapter 12. I am going to get some water though. Hey!
water.
You know.
Become
You know? Yeah. Drink water and become moist. Yep. Sure enough. Okay. All right. Lovely listeners, let's read one more chapter and put you all to bed, so to speak. I'll be windy in this scenario. One last story before you go to sleep. Chapter 12. The children are carried off. The pirate attack had been a complete surprise, a sure proof that the unscrupulous Hook had conducted it improperly. For to surprise the Redskins fairly is beyond the wit of the white man. Damn right it is. By all the unwritten laws of savage warfare, it is always the redskin who attacks, and with the wiliness of his race, he does it just before the dawn. I swear to God, I know it's 120 years old, but it's so hard. Okay. Wiliness of his race, he does it just before the dawn, at which time he knows the courage of the whites to be at its lowest ebb. The white men have in the meantime made a rude stockade on the summit of yonder undulating ground, at the foot of which a stream runs, for it is destruction to be too far from water. There they await the onslaught, the inexperienced ones clutching their revolvers and treading on twigs, but the old hands sleeping tranquilly until just before the dawn. Through the long black night the savage scouts wriggle snake-like among the grass and without stirring a blade. The brushwood closes behind them as silently as sand into which a mole has dived. Not a sound is to be heard, save when they give vent to a wonderful imitation of the lonely call of the coyote. The cry is answered by other braves, and some of them do it even better than the coyotes, who are not very good at it. So the chill hours wear on, and the long suspense is horribly trying to the paleface who has to live through it for the first time. First time. Lost my train of thought. But to the trained hand, those ghastly calls and still ghastlier silences are but an imitation of how the night is marching. This was the usual procedure. This was the usual procedure was so well known to Hook that in disregarding it, he cannot be excused on the plea of ignorance. The pickaninnies, on their part, trusted implicitly to his honor, and their whole action of the night stands out in marked contrast to his. They left nothing undone that was consistent with the reputation of their tribe. With that alertness of the sense which is at once the marvel and despair of civilized peoples. They knew that the pirates were on the island from the moment one of them trod on a dry stick. And in an incredibly short space of time, the coyote cries began. Every foot of the ground between the spot where Hook had landed his forces and the home under the trees was stealthily examined by braves, wearing their moccasins with the heels in front. They found only one hillock with a stream at its base, so that Hook had no choice. He must establish himself and wait for just before the dawn. Everything being thus mapped out with almost diabolical cunning. The main body of the Redskins followed their blankets around them, and in the phlegmatic manner that is to them the pearl of manhood, squatted above the children's home, awaiting the cold moment when they should deal pale death. Struggle there. Here dreaming, though wide awake, of the exquisite tortures to which they were to put him at break of day. They were put him at break of day. Those confiding savages were found by the treacherous Hook. From the accounts afterwards supplied by such of the scouts as escaped the carnage, he does not seem even to have paused at the rising ground, though it is certain that in the grey light he must have seen it. So no thought of waiting to be attacked appears from first to last to have visited his subtle mind. He would not even hold off till the night was nearly spent. On he pounded, with no policy but to fall to. What could the bewildered scouts do, masters as they were of every warlike artifice save this one, but trot helplessly after him, exposing themselves fatally to view, the while they gave pathetic utterance to the coyote cry. Around the brave Tiger Lily were a dozen of her stoutest warriors, and they suddenly saw the perfidious pirates bearing down upon them. Fell from their eyes, then, the film through which they had looked at victory. No more would they torture at the stake. For them, the happy hunting grounds now. They knew it, but as their father's sons, they acquitted themselves. Even then, they had time to gather in a phalanx that would have been hard to break had they risen quickly, but this they were forbidden to do. By the traditions of their race, it is written that the noble savage must never express surprise in the presence of the white. I swear, it's a different time. It was a different time. I apologize to anyone. Lord. Thus terrible as the sudden appearance of the pirates must have been to them, they remained stationary for a moment, not a muscle moving, as if the foe had come by invitation. Then, indeed, the tradition gallantly upheld, they seized their weapons, and the air was torn with a war cry. But it was now too late. It is no part of ours to describe what was a massacre rather than a fight. Thus perished many of the flower of the Pickaninny tribe. Not all avenged did they die. For with Lean Wolf fell Alf Mason, to disturb the Spanish Main no more. And among others who bit the dust were Geo, Scoury, Chas, Turley, and the Alsatian Fogarty. Oh, Fogarty. What a name. Turley fell to the tomahawk of the terrible panther, who ultimately cut a way through the pirates with Tiger Lily and a small remnant of the tribe. To what extent Hook is to blame for his tactics on this occasion is for the historian to decide. Had he waited on the rising ground till the proper hour, he and his men would probably have been butchered, and in judging him, it is only fair to take this into account. What he should perhaps have done was to acquaint his opponents that he proposed to follow a new method. On the other hand, this, as destroying the element of surprise, would have made his strategy of no avail, so that the whole question is beset with difficulties. One cannot at least withhold a reluctant admiration for the wit that had conceived so bold a scheme, and the fell genius with which it was carried out. What were his own feelings about himself at that triumphant moment? Fain would his dogs have known, as breathing heavily and wiping their cutlasses, they gathered at a discreet distance from his hook, and squinted through their ferret eyes at this extraordinary man. Elation must have been in his heart, but his face did not reflect it. Ever a dark and solitary enigma, he stood aloof from his followers in spirit as in substance. The night's work was not yet over, for it was not the redskins he had come out to destroy. They were but the bees to be smoked, so that he should get at the honey. It was Pan he wanted, Pan and Windy and their band, but chiefly Pan. Peter was such a small boy that one tends to wonder at the man's hatred of him. True, he had flung Hook's arm to the crocodile, but even this and the increasing insecurity of life to which it led, owing to the crocodile's pertinacity, hardly account for a vindictiveness so relentless and so malignant. The truth is that there was something about Peter which goaded the pirate captain to frenzy. It was not his courage, it was not his engaging appearance, it was not. There is no beating about the bush, for we know quite well what it was, and have got to tell. It was Peter's cockiness. This had got on Hook's nerves. It made his iron claw twitch, and at night it disturbed him like an insect. While Peter lived, the tortured man felt that he was a lion in a cage into which a sparrow had come. The question now was how to get down the trees, or how to get his dogs down. He ran his greedy eyes over them, searching for the thinnest ones. They wriggled uncomfortably, for they knew he would not scruple to ram them down with poles. In the meantime, what of the boys? We have seen them at the first clang of weapons, turned as it were into stone figures, open-mouthed, all appealing with outstretched arms to Peter. And we return to them as their mouths close, and their arms fall to their sides. The pandemonium above has ceased, almost as suddenly as it arose. Passed like a fierce gust of wind, but they know that in the passing it has determined their fate. Which side had won? The pirates, listening avidly at the mouths of the trees, heard the question put by every boy, and alas, they also heard Peter's answer. If the redskins have won, he said, they will beat the tom-tom. It is always their sign of victory. Now Smee had found the tom-tom, and it was at that moment sitting on it. You will never hear the tom-tom again, he muttered, but inaudibly, of course, for strict silence had been enjoined. To his amazement, Hook signed to him to beat the tom-tom, and slowly there came to Smee an understanding of the dreadful wickedness of the order. Never, probably, had this simple man admired Hook so much. Twice Smee beat upon the instrument, and then stopped to listen gleefully. The tom-tom! The miscreants heard Peter cry, "An Indian victory!" The doomed children answered with a cheer that was music to the black hearts above, and almost immediately they repeated their goodbyes to Peter. This puzzled the pirates, but all their other feelings were swallowed by a base delight that the enemy were about to come up the trees. They smirked at each other and rubbed their hands. Rapidly and silently, Hook gave his orders, one man to each tree, and the others to arrange themselves in a line 2 yards apart. Dun dun dun. That is the end of chapter 12 and the end of book reading for today. So, I'm pretty sure, given that there's only more or less 90 pages left, we will finish this on Wednesday. There's absolutely no way I can stretch that into a fourth episode into Friday. So I will have to begin another new book on Friday. Oh, darn. Ah, man. What a wonderful book. It has been absolutely wonderful reading Peter Pan, except for the whole racism. Questionable. Yeah. Hmm. On a more positive note, um, I feel like my new chibi is turning out pretty well. Pretty excited to use it and test out the little um, hotkeys for it. Yeah, I don't really. Yeah, I don't really use that one too much, but I have it as an option. Aw, thank you. That's very sweet. I don't imagine I will be doing too much sad face either, but I do like it. It is an option. So I imagine for the most part I will be doing mostly this expression. And I've got a couple other commissions in the works. I can't wait to get that logo, to be honest. I'm really excited about that. That'll be a really fun one. And I like that because then moving forward, I can put that in a couple of different places and use it for branded content. We'll get cooking. So I hope everyone had a wonderful day. And let me switch this over. Boop. There we go. Switch over to the just chatting. I hope everyone had a good time today. And I know this session wasn't quite as long as the normal 3 hours plus, but I, didn't have as much to chat about at the beginning. No history of J.M. Barrie, no nervousness. Every time I start a new book series, I always feel a little bit anxious, like, oh Lord, I'm going to fuck this up. I'm scared. Please no. Please don't fuck it up. But I do my best. Um, yep. But on a positive note, this coming week we have the rest of Peter Pan Wednesday. I am debating about Treasure Island. I feel like that would be a really good one for the next phase of November. Um, it's kind of, you have to find this perfect balance because there is alternating Sundays. We have D&D, and then also I have to figure out how long the book is and how many sessions it's going to be, how many words are in the book. Peter Pan was about 30,000 words, so for Peter Pan at that reading level, 10,000 words, in a 3 hour span. I don't know what that would be, like 33,300 some odd words per hour ish. Math is hard, but that one is a lower reading level. It's a little easier. Yep, it is a chunky book. It's actually not too bad. I looked at it. It looks like it's about 47,000 words. So it would be longer than Peter Pan. Um, I need something that'll also carry me through the week because Friday the 24th, I believe, that's the Friday after American Friendsgiving is happening. Yeah, not too bad. Because these chapters and this reading level is pretty nice. You're reading to a younger audience, I imagine. So, yeah. Did everybody have a good weekend? Mine was pretty good. Yesterday I cooked carbonara and got to enjoy that meal. I found a good recipe for it too. It was pretty easy. It was, let me grab that actually. Look at it again. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Da, 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 da. So the recipe was from Bon Appetit. I'll post that in the chat here for those of you. Super simple ingredients, really easy. Instead of using, I do believe it calls for um, a special type of like pancetta or um, originally any kind of fancy guanciale or salt cured pork jowl. I made it with bacon. So don't get too excited. It was not as fancy as it could have been. Let's see. Go over here to OBS. Here's the link to that I used for the carbonara. And I also had that with um, a gently steamed, so it was still kind of crispy, not crispy, but firm broccolini with a little bit of butter on it, a little bit of seasoning. But yeah, super simple. I had linguine was my pasta. I used regular good old fashioned bacon. I did use pecorino romano and Parmesan cheese because I'm a huge nerd for cheese. Um, and then I had like 4 yolks, 2 whole eggs, um, mixed with the Parmesan cheese. That was your carbonara sauce. It was really quite good. So, if you ever want to like cook something at home for yourself, this fed me for about 2 days because it was like dinner, um, and then lunch, and then like a snack earlier today. So it was nice. Multiple meals. Very, very tasty. But anyway, I digress. I'm sitting here talking about food and it's making me hungry. So I
That
am
sounds delicious. Do you think it's worth it to use anything other than bacon?
maybe the pancetta might be good, to be honest. I think pancetta has kind of a different like flavor than regular old bacon. You could use like pork belly too. Um I was reminded that pork belly is delicious just seared in a pan, and I need to try that. And I think that would be an amazing carbonara with pork belly. Pancetta, though, when you cook that up, it has to be nice and crispy because like the last thing I want to do is like kind of like prosciutto. Like if it's not cooked, if you don't cut it up first and you go to bite into it, it's just kind of long and stringy. It's just not a fun time. So you gotta crisp it up and make it small pieces. It mixes really good into the pasta. Okay. I am going to try this whole raid thing. I've never done it before, so I don't know how well this will go, but I'm going to pop over to my friend Whistleface, who is a um, DJ. He does some really great music. So let me just parp over to here with you, lovely listeners. And feel free to stick around and listen to his music. I love to catch it. I'll probably be listening to that while I go put something together for dinner. And if not, have a great night, and I will see you guys on Wednesday.